The first time the technician noticed something strange, he didn't think much of it. He thought maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe he was imagining things because he was new on the station and still getting used to everything. But after a few days, he realized it wasn't in his head. It was happening again and again, and it was always the same pattern. The alien queen, one of the most respected leaders on the station, kept avoiding him. He didn't understand why. He barely knew her. He had never even talked to her for more than a few seconds. All he ever did was pass by respectfully, keep his distance, and follow the rules everyone followed around high-ranking alien guests. Even then, she acted like he carried something dangerous. The moment she spotted him, she quietly slipped away, choosing another hallway, even if it took longer. If she was sitting in the common chamber, and he walked in, she stood up and left so quickly that it almost looked rude, though she never made eye contact long enough for her expression to give anything away. At first, he laughed it off in his mind. Maybe she didn't like the smell of humans. Maybe her species had strange instincts. Maybe he looked like someone she disliked. Or maybe she simply didn't want unnecessary interaction with anyone who wasn't a diplomat or an official representative. That made sense, at least at first. But the more it happened, the more he felt something wasn't normal. Other crew members noticed too. One of the engineers teased him once, saying, "Every time you walk in, she vanishes. You sure you're not allergic to royalty?" Another crew member whispered, "She never acts like that around anyone else. Only you. That's weird." He couldn't disagree. The alien queen was known for being calm, composed, and incredibly confident. Her presence alone made people straighten their posture. She moved like someone who had been trained from birth to look strong, to look unshaken. When she spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Everyone around her just listened, because she had the kind of authority that didn't require shouting. But whenever he came near, that confidence cracked. It wasn't fear exactly, though she did look startled sometimes. It was something else, something he couldn't define. Like she was unsure of herself. Like she didn't know how to behave around him. And the technician couldn't understand how a queen, someone who had seen battles, negotiations, and galaxies, could be unsure around a simple human worker like him. One day, he decided to test whether it was really him or just his imagination. During lunch break, he walked into the dining hall, trying to act casual. A few alien officers were eating, including the queen. She was sitting with her attendants, quietly listening to one of them talk about repairs happening on the ship docks. The moment her eyes lifted and spotted him at the entrance, her hands froze. She didn't move for a full heartbeat. Then she stood up so quickly that her attendants looked confused. She left her food, turned away, and walked out with hurried steps. Her guards followed her in silence, though one of them gave the technician a curious glance, as if trying to figure out what he had done to cause such a reaction. That was the moment he knew it wasn't in his head. She was avoiding him. She was doing it deliberately. And she was doing it with a level of urgency that didn't make sense. He felt embarrassed at first. It's hard not to feel guilty when the most important person on the station behaves like she can't stand being near you. But then the embarrassment turned into curiosity. He wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't break rules. He didn't speak out of turn or push boundaries. He kept to himself and did his job quietly like everyone else. There was no reason a queen should act like that. Still, it kept happening. If he walked down a hallway and she happened to be coming from the other end, she immediately took the nearest turn. Even if that turn led to a maintenance area she would normally never enter. If he was fixing equipment and she came into the chamber, she would quickly excuse herself and leave. Once he heard her whisper something to her guards in her own language, but he couldn't understand the words. All he saw was the way she lowered her head slightly when he passed, almost like she didn't want him to see her face. His coworker started calling him the Queen Repellent, but only when she wasn't around. They joked that he must have done something heroic in a past life that scared royalty. But behind the jokes, even they were confused. No one had ever seen her behave so strangely. At night, when the station lights dimmed and the corridors grew quiet, the technician sometimes sat by the large viewing window overlooking the stars. He liked the silence. He liked watching the ship lights move across the darkness. But even during peaceful moments, the Queen's behavior kept floating back into his mind. Why him? Why only him? He didn't want to overthink it, but he couldn't help feeling there was something more behind it. Something she wasn't telling anyone. Everything took a strange turn one afternoon while he was working near the diplomatic wing. He had been assigned to check the temperature regulators that kept the alien delegates comfortable. Their species were sensitive to even small changes, and a malfunction could cause a diplomatic issue. He was used to the routine scan the panel, adjust the calibrations, log the data, move on. As he worked, he didn't realize someone else had entered the hallway. When he finished tightening a small bolt and stood up, he turned and froze. The alien queen was standing just a few steps behind him. For a moment, they both stared at each other. She looked shocked, as if she hadn't expected him to turn around. Her hands tightened slightly at her sides. Her shoulders tensed. She looked like her instinct was to run, but she couldn't not without making it obvious that she was avoiding him. There was no guard with her, no attendant, no advisor. She had walked into the hallway alone, probably thinking it was empty. The air felt heavier than usual, not threatening, but full of unspoken questions. The technician slowly opened his mouth to say something polite, maybe "good afternoon" or "excuse me," but she moved before he could speak. She stepped back, not aggressively, not fearfully, but with a suddenness that made it clear she wasn't ready to be near him. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't look angry. She didn't look annoyed. She looked uncomfortable, almost like she wasn't sure how to act in his presence. He raised his hand gently, trying to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here," he said softly. She didn't answer. She just stood there, breathing a little faster than normal, her gaze still lowered. The silence stretched long enough that he felt like he had done something terribly wrong, even though he had no idea what. "It's okay," he added, keeping his voice light. "I'll leave the hallway. You can pass." He turned slightly, ready to walk away and give her space, but her soft voice stopped him. "No. Wait." It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. Her voice was quieter than usual, missing the strong tone she normally used when addressing others. He turned back, surprised. She seemed to struggle to find words. She looked like she wanted to explain something, but wasn't sure how to say it. Her fingers trembled faintly. She seemed fragile, which was strange to see in someone who carried the weight of an entire species' pride. Before he could ask anything, she stepped aside awkwardly and left the hallway with hurried steps, almost as if she regretted speaking at all. Technician stood there long after she had disappeared around the corner. That single moment told him more than all the previous days combined. She wasn't avoiding him out of anger. She wasn't avoiding him because she disliked him. She was avoiding him because something about him made her unsure of herself. And that realization only deepened the mystery. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of understanding why the alien queen kept hiding from him, and why the truth behind her behavior would shake him in ways he never expected. The next few days on the station felt different for the technician. Before, the alien queen avoided him quietly, as if she hoped he never noticed. But after that moment in the hallway, when she told him to wait with a voice that sounded. Almost frightened, everything changed. She still avoided him, but not in the same smooth, practiced way. Now, every time she saw him, there was a hesitation in her steps. Like her mind was arguing with her instincts. It made him even more curious. He wasn't trying to invade her space or make her uncomfortable. In fact, he began taking longer routes, just so he wouldn't accidentally cross paths with her. But the station was not big enough for that to work forever, and she moved around more than most people expected. She visited the gardens, the research bay, the medical wing, the training rooms, and the observation decks. She wasn't the type to sit in her chambers all day. She liked walking, watching, and learning, and unfortunately for her, that made bumping into him a lot more likely. One afternoon, he was calibrating a power relay when he felt someone's presence behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He finished adjusting the last gauge, wiped his hands on a cloth, and stood up slowly. When he turned around, there she was again, standing close enough that he wondered how long she had been behind him. Her head snapped up as soon as he faced her. She took a step back in surprise, almost bumping into a wall. Her reaction wasn't dramatic, but to someone like him who had seen her acting poised and graceful around everyone else, that small jolt of panic spoke loudly. The technician tried to smile softly. He didn't want her to think he was trying to corner her. "It's okay," he said. "I didn't hear you come in." She looked down at her hands, as if debating whether to leave or speak. Her shoulders rose and fell in a quiet breath. He waited, giving her time. After a long pause, she raised her head again, not fully, but enough for him to see her uneasy gaze. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was gentle, without the command she normally used. He didn't know how to respond at first. She had never asked to talk to him before. She barely even stayed close enough to say hello. "Of course," he said respectfully. "Is something wrong?" She looked around the room, almost like she was checking if anyone else was listening. "Not here," she whispered. "Too many ears." He blinked. "Too many ears?" The room was empty except for them. But he knew she was right. Security cameras were everywhere, and the station's walls carried sound easily. Anyone passing by could overhear. A quiet conversation if they listened hard enough. Double quotes. "Where would you like to talk?" He asked. She hesitated again, her fingers tightening around the long cloth she wore around her wrist. It was something her species used to show rank. He noticed she kept pulling it gently, almost like a nervous habit. "There is a place," she said quietly. "Private. Come." He followed her, keeping at least a few steps behind so she wouldn't feel trapped. She walked quickly, almost too quickly, as if she didn't want anyone to see them walking together. She led him through hallways he rarely used, past storage rooms and quiet corridors with dim lighting. They finally reached a small observation room. It was one of the least used on the station. Only a handful of people even remembered it existed. It had a single long window that faced a cluster of distant stars. Other than that, the room was empty except for 2 chairs and a narrow shelf with cleaning supplies. The Queen stepped inside first, scanned the corners, then turned to him and gestured for him to enter. He walked in carefully, and the door closed behind them with a soft click. For a moment, she said nothing. She stood near the window, staring at the stars as if gathering courage. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. The silence stretched longer than he expected. He didn't want to pressure her, but he also didn't want to stand there forever, waiting for her to speak. "You asked to talk," he said gently. "It's okay. Take your time." Her chin lifted slightly as she breathed in. When she finally looked at him, the expression in her eyes wasn't one he had ever seen on a queen. It wasn't pride or anger or authority. It was uncertainty. You are wondering why I avoid you, she said softly. He didn't pretend otherwise. Yes, I thought I might be bothering you somehow. She shook her head quickly. No, you do nothing wrong. That surprised him. If he wasn't the problem, then why did she act like being near him was difficult? She walked a little closer, not too close, but closer than she had ever been willingly. Even that small movement looked hard for her. Her breath came out uneven. My species. She began, then stopped. He waited. We sense things that humans cannot, she continued slowly. Not thoughts, not memories, something deeper. She placed a hand lightly on her chest. Intent, he frowned slightly. Intent? Yes, the feeling behind someone's presence, their honesty, their loyalties, their emotional weight. She lowered her eyes again. We feel it as clearly as humans feel the warmth of sunlight. That was new to him. No one on the station had explained this ability to the human crew. Maybe because it was something the Queen preferred to keep private. I don't understand, he said carefully. What does that have to do with me? She swallowed hard. It was the first time he saw a queen, an actual ruler of an alien empire, look nervous. The first time I walked past you, she whispered, I sensed something I had never felt before, something so strong. It frightened me. He didn't know what to say. What strong thing had she sensed in him? He wasn't special. He wasn't a soldier or a leader or someone with extraordinary talent. He was just a technician trying to do his job. What did you feel? He asked softly. Her hands squeezed the fabric on her wrists again. Purity, she said finally. A kind of honest intention that is rare, almost impossible to find. It was not normal. It overwhelmed me. He blinked. Purity? From me? It didn't make sense. He wasn't perfect. He had flaws, worries, doubts, just like everyone else. She nodded slowly. You do not hide parts of yourself the way others do, she said. Your intentions are not mixed, not divided, not heavy with self-interest. When you walk into a room, your presence feels clear. The technician almost laughed, not out of rudeness, but disbelief. I don't even know how to respond to that. Her expression softened a little, but her shoulders were still tense. I hid from you because I did not know how to be near someone with that kind of presence, she admitted. It made me feel exposed. He stared at her quietly. He had expected many things. Maybe she disliked humans. Maybe he smelled strange to her species. Maybe he had accidentally broken some cultural rule. But this was the last thing he imagined. So she wasn't avoiding him because he made her uncomfortable in a bad way. She was avoiding him because he made her uncomfortable in a way she wasn't used to, a way that made her feel vulnerable. She took a small step back, as if embarrassed by her own confession. I am a queen, she said softly. I am taught to read others, to control how I feel, to be stronger than the people I lead. But with you, I cannot hide what I sense, and that frightened me. The room grew quiet again, filled only by the faint hum of the station systems. Needed a moment to process everything. He didn't expect to be the cause of a queen's nervousness or her confusion. I never meant to make things difficult for you, he said gently. I know, she whispered. That is why I came to speak to you. For the first time since he met her, she raised her eyes fully, meeting his gaze without looking away. Her expression was no longer unreadable. There was something almost human in it, something vulnerable and honest. I do not want to keep running from you, she said quietly, but I needed you to know the reason. He nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected to. I'm glad you told me, he said. She breathed out a soft, relieved sound. It was the first time she looked lighter, as if the truth no longer weighed so heavily on her. What neither of them realized was that this private conversation The first real moment of honesty between them was only the beginning of a connection that would soon change much more than either expected. The technician didn't sleep well that night. After the conversation with the alien queen in the small observation room, his mind kept replaying her words over and over. He lay awake on his bunk, staring at the ceiling while the quiet humming of the station's life support systems filled the air. Purity, a rare kind of intention, something that overwhelmed her. He couldn't understand why someone like him, a regular worker with ordinary thoughts and habits, could have such an effect on someone as powerful as a queen. It didn't make sense. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even the most experienced technician on the crew. So why him? He turned on his side and closed his eyes. But even in the dark, he could still see the expression she had when she confessed her truth. Her voice had trembled slightly, something he doubted many people had ever heard from her. The idea that she felt exposed around him didn't comfort him. It confused him more. The next morning, when he stepped out of his quarter, he expected everything to return to the same awkward routine. He walks into a room, she leaves. He goes down a hallway. She disappears before he reaches her. But something was different. This time, she didn't run. Late morning, he entered the research bay to check on a console. When he looked up from his work, she was standing across the room, speaking to an officer. He felt himself tense slightly, not because he feared her, but because he didn't want to make her uncomfortable again. He waited for her to notice him that. She eventually did. Their eyes met for a brief second. He expected her to turn away or excuse herself instantly. Instead, she hesitated just for a moment, but she stayed. Her hands tightened around the cloth wrapped at her wrist, but she kept speaking to the officer. She didn't flee like before. It wasn't perfect, and she still looked uneasy, but it was progress. He didn't approach her. He didn't want to push. He simply continued his work quietly. After a few minutes, she left the room slowly, not in a rush like she had in the past. It was the first small sign that her fear, or whatever she felt, was shifting. Over the next few days, similar small changes kept happening. Sometimes she walked past him without changing direction. Sometimes she stayed in the same room longer than usual, even after noticing him. She still avoided looking directly at him most of the time, but she no longer bolted the moment he arrived. It was clear she was trying. One afternoon, the station went into mild alert mode because of a system malfunction near the engine chambers. It wasn't dangerous, but it required several technicians, including him, to rush down and fix it before the temperature rose too much. The Queen happened to be inspecting something near that area when the alarm went off. When he arrived, she was there, surrounded by guards. The guards were trying to usher her back to a safer section of the station, but she kept looking toward the malfunctioning chamber with worry. Her species valued engineering and structure heavily, and she didn't like leading mechanical issues. Unattended. In the middle of the noise and flashing lights, she spotted him. For a brief moment, her eyes widened the same way they had before, but this time, she didn't look away. She didn't retreat. She simply stood still, watching him as he checked the control panels. The alarms echoed loudly, but all he could notice was her steady, focused gaze. He nodded to her, trying to reassure her that everything would be handled. She nodded back. It was small, but meaningful. When the malfunction was fixed, she came closer than she normally allowed herself to. Not close enough to cause another wave of discomfort, but close enough that he could see she was trying her hardest to face whatever emotion she was battling. "You handled it well," she said softly. He blinked in surprise. She had never complimented him before. "Thank you," he replied, unsure how else to respond. She looked like she wanted to say more, but couldn't form the words. After a short pause, she walked away with her guards, leaving him standing there with a strange feeling in his chest. That night, he found himself thinking less about why she hid and more about what she felt. It wasn't just fear, it was a confusion. She didn't understand herself. And something told him this wasn't something her species talked about openly. It wasn't something a queen, someone trained to be perfect, ever wanted to admit. 2 days later, everything became clearer. He was repairing one of the heating regulators when he heard a soft sound behind him. When he turned around, she was there again, alone, without guards. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands. "I hope I'm not in your way," he said, trying to keep things light. "No," she replied, her voice calm but serious. "I came to finish what I could not say before." His heart beat a little faster. Something about her tone told him this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. She walked to the center of the room and stopped, keeping a respectful distance, but facing him directly. He could see she was nervous. It was in the way her hands fidgeted with the cloth wrapped around her wrist. "My species does not only sense intent," she said quietly. "There is more. Something I did not explain earlier." He nodded slowly. "I'm listening." She breathed in deeply, gathering courage. "We sense truth," she continued. "Not facts, not words. The truth inside someone, their sincerity, their nature, who they are when nothing is hidden." He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't know what to expect. "The day I sensed you for the first time," she said, "your truth was stronger than anything I have ever felt from another being. It frightened me because humans do not usually feel that clear to us. Most species do not." He felt a strange pressure in his chest, not fear, but something like being told a secret he wasn't prepared for. "I'm just a regular person," he whispered. "Not to my senses," she replied. "To me, your presence feels like light without shadow. I do not mean goodness or perfection. I mean sincerity, clean intention, no hidden layers." He almost laughed in disbelief. "But that can't be right. I have doubts. I have worries. I get angry sometimes. All living beings do," she replied. "But even then, your emotions feel honest. You do not pretend. You do not hide. You do not think one thing while acting another way. That is rare. Extremely rare." Her voice shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of admitting something so personal. "For my kind," she added gently, "sensing such a truth feels like standing in a wind with no place to hide." He understood. She wasn't hiding from him because she feared him. She was hiding because he made her feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. She was a queen. She lived every day wearing layers of responsibility, expectation, and restraint. Her entire life was built around controlling her emotions, hiding her vulnerabilities, and presenting strength. But around him, she couldn't hide anything. That was the truth she had been scared to tell. He didn't know what to say. Even if he tried, no words would have felt right. So he stayed quiet and let her continue. "I wanted to avoid you because I feared losing control of myself," she whispered. "Because when I am near you, my senses react too strongly. I feel every intention from you clearly. It is overwhelming. But also," she hesitated, "it feels safe." The last 2 words were spoken so softly, he almost missed them. Safe. Queen, someone who ruled worlds, felt safe around him. He felt a warmth rise in his chest, not pride, but something gentle and human. Something that made him want to reassure her, even though he didn't know how. "I'm sorry if I made things difficult for you," he said quietly. She shook her head immediately. "You did nothing wrong. I am the one who struggled. I did not know how to understand this feeling. That is why I hid." Her voice softened again. "But I do not want to hide anymore." He exhaled slowly, surprised by how much those words meant. "I'm glad," he said. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable around me." She lowered her gaze for a moment, then lifted it again with a calmness he hadn't seen in her before. "You do not make me uncomfortable," she said. "You make me unguarded. That is why I hid. But I think maybe it is time I stopped running from that." For the first time since they met, she looked him in the eyes without trembling, without looking away, without shielding herself. In that moment, he understood that she had just shared something incredibly vulnerable, something her own people might never hear from her. And he also understood that the connection between them was now deeper than either of them had planned. He stood outside the small shelter the Queen had chosen for the night, trying to understand everything she had confessed to him just hours earlier. Even now, the words kept echoing in his mind, refusing to settle. He kept replaying the moment. She finally stopped hiding, the moment she told him the real reason she always disappeared whenever he got too close. And the truth had hit him so hard that his whole body had gone still. He never imagined the Queen of an entire alien people could feel afraid, but that was exactly what she had told him. She was afraid of him, not because he was dangerous, not because he had ever harmed her, but because he was the first human she had ever trusted beyond her own guards. And trust, for someone in her position, was something she had rarely experienced. Her people expected her to be perfect, calm, and always in control. Showing worry or uncertainty was something she avoided at all costs. And yet, with him, something inside her would shift. She didn't feel like a queen around him. She felt like someone trying to understand a world completely new. When she confessed that, he had gone silent. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't want to break the fragile honesty she had shared. Now the night was quiet around them. A soft breeze carried the sound of distant wildlife. A few glowing insects circled lazily near the strange woven fabric of the shelter, casting faint blue lights on the ground. He breathed in deeply and stepped closer. "May I come in?" he asked softly. A moment later, the entrance flap moved aside, and she appeared. She wasn't wearing her royal armor or her ceremonial cloth. She was wrapped in the simple travel covering she started using on their journey, something far more comfortable than the heavy metal she normally carried. Her eyes, deep, reflecting colors he could never quite name, watched him with a mix of caution and hope. "You may," she said. He stepped inside. The shelter was small, made only for rest, but warm and gently lit from within. She sat near the center, her posture straight, yet not rigid, as if she were forcing herself to stay calm. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, sitting a short distance away. "When you told me the truth earlier, I just didn't know how to respond." Her fingers tightened slightly around her covering. "I feared that." "No," he said quickly, "not in a bad way. I was surprised. You've always been so strong, so in control. It never crossed my mind that trusting me would make you hide." She looked down, as if embarrassed. "It is not common for a ruler to admit fear. My people believe a queen must be without weakness. Even my own court sees attachment as a distraction. My bond with them is expected to be distant, formal. But with you—" She paused and struggled for the right words. "I am unsure how to behave." He listened closely. The honesty in her voice felt fragile, as if she was letting him see a part of her world no one else dared to look into. "You don't have to act a certain way around me," he said gently. "I don't want anything from you. Not loyalty, not gifts, not status. Just the truth. That's all." "That is what makes this difficult," she murmured. "Your presence feels peaceful, dangerous in a different way." He blinked. "Dangerous? Because it softens me." She finally lifted her eyes, and for the first time he saw something he had never seen in her before: vulnerability. pure and unhidden. When I hide, she continued, I am trying to protect myself from that feeling, and from the possibility that you may one day walk away. He stared at her, stunned. This powerful queen, feared by some, respected by many, the one who commanded entire fleets and moved with absolute authority, was afraid he might leave? That's why you avoided coming near me? He asked quietly. Yes, she whispered. It is easier to act as a queen than to feel like someone who is learning to trust. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gentle glow of the shelter's lights shimmered softly across her skin. She wasn't trying to look formal or royal. She looked real, sincere, almost human in the way. She hesitated. He slowly shifted, moving a little closer, but not too close. He didn't want her to feel cornered or pressured. If I had known that, he said softly, I would have been more careful with my words. I thought you were keeping your distance because I annoyed you. Her expression softened. You have never annoyed me. He laughed quietly. Not even once? Not even once, she said, and her voice held a faint warmth that surprised him. He let out a long, slow breath. I never planned to leave you, you know. The queen's head tilted slightly, as if trying to determine whether he meant it. I'm here because I want to be, he continued. Not because I was ordered. T.O., not because of duty. I stay because I choose to. She watched him closely, her eyes searching his. The room seemed quieter, as if the air itself had paused. You speak with certainty, she said, because I feel it. She took a slow breath, her tension easing for the first time that evening. She shifted slightly, relaxing her posture as though the weight she had carried was finally lifting. I did not expect you to respond this way, she admitted. Most would have used my fear against me. I'm not most people, he replied with a small smile. No, she said with a faint, almost unseen smile of her own. You are not. He noticed how her shoulders lowered, how the tightness in her voice faded. The more he spoke, the more she allowed herself to relax, as if her heart finally believed that he was not here to harm or take advantage of her trust. Can I ask you something? He said after a quiet moment. Yes. When? You hid from me. What were you thinking in those moments? What went through your mind? She hesitated, then answered honestly. I wondered why I felt drawn to someone I barely understood. I wondered why your presence changed the way I carried myself. I wondered why I wanted to listen to your voice longer than necessary. These thoughts confused me. And confusion is not something a queen is trained to handle gently. His chest tightened slightly, not from discomfort, but from realizing the depth of her struggle. You don't have to run anymore, he said softly. If being near me makes things confusing, then let's face it together. You don't have to pretend around me. Again, she looked at him with quiet disbelief, as if she had waited her entire life to hear those words, but never expected them to come. Together, she repeated in a whisper. Together, he confirmed. Silence followed. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, like the calm after a storm. She slowly reached out one hand, not touching him, just placing it near his on the ground. A simple gesture, small but meaningful. I will try, she said softly. I will try not to hide. That's all I could ask for, he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, then allowed a gentle breath to escape, almost like a relieved sigh. For the first time since he met her, the queen looked like she truly believed she wasn't alone. The night outside remained quiet. The insects continued to glow and drift. The world seemed to settle, and they sat together, close enough to feel each other's presence, but respectful of space, speaking softly about their journey, their fears, and their hopes. And the queen, who once hid every time she felt unsure, stayed right there beside him, without moving away, without closing herself off, without disappearing into silence. When the light dimmed and the night grew deeper, she spoke one last time before they rested. I did not know trust could feel this gentle. He smiled. Neither did I. And in that quiet shelter, under the dim glow and soft hum of the alien night, the queen finally stopped hiding, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she finally believed he would not let her face that fear alone.